Welcome back, everyone. This is Pastor Jose Luna from Disciples of the Word Ministries. Remember that Disciples of the Word Ministries is located at 63 Arlington Street in Nashua. Can you guys still hear me? Right?
Yes.
Yes. In Arlington Street in Nashua, New Hampshire. Let me just share my screen here so you guys can see it. Actually, let me see. And we are a Sabbath keeping group of believers. We meet on Saturdays, and this is the building and the address 63, and the coordinates are there also 63 Arlington Street, Nashua, New Hampshire. And feel free to join us anytime on Saturdays, not Sundays, Saturdays, because we are a Sabbath keeping group of believers that we believe that, you know, we ought to follow God's commandments. And one of them is remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. We are a non-denominational church that also keeps the Sabbath, the Shabbat. So if you want to come to a free atmosphere, um, uh, an atmosphere that is of worship that is not heavy and non-condemnatory, non-judgmental. So come to Disciples of the Word Ministries. Remember 63 Arlington Street in Nashua. So we already prayed before we went live. We have been studying the book of Esther. We started last week. We said a few things about that book. So we'll continue in chapter 2 so that we see what's going on a little bit more in details. So let me share with you right here. Actually, let me share it this way. Let me share with you right here. Um, chapter 2 of of the book of Esther. All right. Can you guys read in there or it's too small? Let me know.
It's small, too small
It's
to read.
it's too small to read, so let me share it this other way. Um, let's see. Let me share it this way. That way you will be able to see better. Is that
Much
better?
better. Much
Okay.
better.
Excellent. So, chapter 2 um, of the book of Esther, we said a few things last week. One of the things that we talked about it last week is the only book that does not mention the name of God. We also said that the star of this book is not Esther, is not Mordecai, is in reality King Ahasuerus, which is a title, is the official title, or it was the official title of the Middle Persian kings in the Middle Persian Empire. His real name was Artaxerxes, and he was married to this girl. He was a commoner, but he was a member of the nobility, and her name was Vashti. And chapter 2, as we learned last week, that in chapter 1, that King Ahasuerus' goal was to unify the empire. That's why he's bringing all his courtiers from all over the empire, 127 provinces, which we spoke briefly about that in relationship to Sarah. And we also learned from chapter 1 that he requested his wife to come and be part of the unifying banquet because he wanted to show her to his couriers that were with him visiting. She understood this as a display of presenting her as just as an object, when in reality that was not his political objective. But anyway, whatever happened. Unfortunately for Vashti, we're going to find out what happened to her today. We are not condoning either uh, his treatment of her as a woman. Uh, she, he did it, and in a culture where women women were considered objects, I think what happened was not surprising. Therefore, we find right here in chapter 2 the story of how Vashti became dethroned. After these things, when the wrath of the king Ahasuerus was assuaged, which means was diminished, he had passed, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what was decreed against her. And remember that in chapter 1 we learned that he wanted through the law to find a way to divorce her and also to find a way to punish her for what she did. Because in a culture where the law of the king is rule, even the mother of the king was subjected to the king. Even the father of the king was subjected to the king. Imagine now the wife. The wives were considered objects in the Middle East. I believe is the same today, with the exception of the country of Israel, apparently. So, verse 2, then said the king's servants that minister unto him, let there be sought for the king young virgins fair to look on. So it looks like this remembrance that he's having here, that the king is having here, is like he's feeling some sort of nostalgia. He is missing his wife. It seems like he's feeling lonely. And there is this sense of loneliness similar to Adam when he felt alone, or he felt aloneness when he was in the Garden of Eden and God made a woman for him. So it's a very similar story here. It's quite interesting to see the comparisons between these two stories. We won't get into that. That's for a course. I teach a course on this in Spanish for those that would like to or understand Spanish. Is in my website www.lunabibleinstitute.org. It's the book of Esther, and there is a lot in there just about this book. Now, verse 3, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins unto Shushan the castle, to the house of the women, unto the custody of Hegai, the king's chamberlain, keeper of the women, and let their ointments be given them. So they are calling for some sort of beauty contest, some sort of pageant contest, some sort of Miss Universe, Miss World, Miss America contest, something like that, right?
So it
And
looks like the servants are in control.
well, the servants are making a suggestion to the king, and it looks like they already thought this through, and they saw the nostalgia the king is having, but he cannot go back in his law because he already issued a decree that Vashti be dethroned. So she had been dethroned. And because of the laws of the Medes and Persians, once you issue a law, you cannot go back to the law. You cannot go and break it. And when they see the nostalgia, he is kind of perhaps erratic, kind of grumpy. They decided to suggest to the king what to do to find a different woman, a different wife. He could access any of those women that were concubines and whatever and whatnot. But in this particular case, obviously he loved this girl and he's feeling it. He's feeling her absence, right? So then, verse 4, and let the maiden that pleaseth the king be queen instead of Vashti. And the king pleased, and the thing pleased the king, and he did so. And basically, they are suggesting do this pageant contest, beauty contest, and find the best virgins all over the empire. Let them bring them in. Let them as access all the in the palace of the women, access all the beauty, all the jewelry, whatever, and let them parade before you. You choose the one that you like. There was a certain Jew in Shushan, and here is something fascinating. I won't get into that, but the reason why we decided to do this book is because of all the anti-Semitism that is going on in the world today. And I think this book is a must read so that we understand that at the end of the day, we need to side with the side of common sense and also with God's plan. There was a certain Jew in Shushan, the castle, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. So he's a Benjamite. Please don't forget that, because this is going to play a very fascinating role in fulfilling or bringing a closure to another story that is found in the book of Genesis. Okay. Now, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captives that had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, who Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. So basically, he's saying this guy was carried away sometime in 596 BC or 686 BC. Jeconiah, I think, was 596 BC, and he what's basically saying about Mordecai is that, or Mordecai, let me use Mordecai better, is that this guy was a Benjamite, and he was some sort of enslaved individual, enslaved in the sense that he was carried away, he was taken off his land and brought into Babylon, and that's why he's in the Middle Persian Empire. When the Middle Persians conquer Babylon, of course, he was stuck in there. And he brought up Hadassah. Who's Hadassah? That is Esther. So Hadassah is the Hebrew name of Esther. Esther is the Persian name of this girl. His uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maiden was a beautiful form and fair to look on. And when her father and mother were dead, Mordecai took her for his own daughter. So Mordecai is basically raising this girl that was probably killed in the besiegement of Nebuchadnezzar when he went perhaps the second time into Babylon, and both parents die, and Mordecai survived. So she took this girl and he raised her as his own daughter. And it sounds like Mordecai himself was not married. That's what it sounds like. So it came to pass, when the king's commandment and his decree was published, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan, the castle, to the custody of Hegai, that Esther was taken into the king's house to the custody of Hegai, keeper of the women. She was one of hundreds that were taken into the king's house, into the custody of this eunuch called Hegai. And the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him. So somehow she was gracious. Esther, Hadassah, was a very gracious girl, right? And he speedily gave her her ointments with her portions and the 7 maidens who were meet to be given her out of the king's house. And he advanced her and her maidens to the best place in the house of the women. Obviously, Hegai has his eyes on this girl. Somehow, as a eunuch he was keen to read women very, very well, because he spent his time with them. He saw that she was different. He saw that she was genuine. He saw that this girl was not there as a gold digger. She was there for other reasons. And that obviously opened up a complete side of the brain of Hegai, that he gave her favors. So she was favored from the very beginning. Verse 10, now the author wants us to know, making some sort of a clarendon, some sort of disclaimer, where he's clarifying some things that he didn't say earlier in the narrative. Verse 10, Esther had not made known her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not tell it. This is a girl that is in the midst of them. She lived in Shushan, so no one is going to suspect that she is a Jew. Why? She grew up in Shushan. She developed the Shushan Medo-Persian accent of the language. No one suspects this girl speaks Hebrew, that she's a Jew. She's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful girl. And Mordecai told her, don't say anything about where you're coming from. Do not dare to disclose your heritage. Why? Because remember, the Jews have always been hated. All right? They have always been hated for some reason, and that is not new. So we should not be surprised with what's going on. This is not new. It is surprising after the Holocaust, but that seed of hatred is still there worldwide. And Mordecai, verse 11, walked every day before the court of the women's house to know how Esther did and what would become of her. He cares for her as his daughter. He wants to know how she's doing. He also works in the palace at the gate. Every day he would go and ask one of the servants, how is she doing? How's Esther doing? Etc. The interesting thing is that they know he's a Jew, but they don't realize that she's not for some reason. Or maybe the servants know that she's a Jew, but they don't care, right? They don't care. It's none of their business, so they are not going to say anything. Now, when the turn of every maiden was come to go into King Ahasuerus, after that it had been done to her according to the law for the women, 12 months. So they spent a year in this palace, this castle. For so were the days of their anointing accomplished, to wit, 6 months with oil and myrrh, and 6 months with sweet otters and with other ointments of the women. Basically, these women were totally transformed. If they were overweight, they had to lose weight. If they had freckles or whatever thing that they consider not perfect in their eyes, I don't know what standards they use. They spend 6 months fixing one way and another 6 months fixing whatever it is that they thought was not perfect enough or good enough. When the maiden came unto the king, verse 13, whatsoever she desired was given her to go with her out of the house of the women unto the king's house. So they had these closets with all kinds of jewelry and very refined royal dresses and all that. They could take whatever they wanted. It was theirs. And I imagine a lot of women put too much because they wanted to overly impress the king. And when you put too much, you over impress people that you overwhelm them. And I think that's also dangerous. Verse 14, in the evening, she went, and on the morrow she returned into the second house of the women to the custody of Shashgaz, the king's chamberlain, who kept the concubines. She came in unto the king no more, except the king delighted in her, and she were called by name. That means that these girls were parading night after night before the king. If the king liked you, or if the king liked a girl, she would be called by name to go back another night. Now, we can imagine that if there were 127 provinces, and this decree went all over the places. Let me see how far this decree went. Let's see right here. And let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins unto Shushan, the castle, to the house of the women. Now, there were at least 127 of them, of these girls. I imagine there were way more than that. So 127 provinces, at least 127 contestants. I would say there were over 500 contestants in that house. This is my personal guess. You know, everybody wanted to gain access to power. Somehow that was beyond this, beyond imagination. Verse 15. Now, when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, now he introduces another detail that he didn't tell us before about the uncle who died. The uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, was come to go in unto the king. She required nothing but what Hegai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, appointed. In other words, she didn't ask for jewelry. She didn't ask for dresses. This is not a girl that is thinking about these things. She's not a girl interested or craving for power. She is just there because her uncle bid her to do it and basically told her, would you like to go? Go and please do it. You never know, right? And she allowed the eunuch, the guy in charge of the women, to choose for her. What should I wear? What should I put on? And Haggai, who knew the king very well, who knew the taste of the king in regards to women, he chose for her what she needed to wear and what she needed to put on. And that gave her an edge over the others. He gave her advantage because now she's going with whatever the king liked based on Haggai's observation. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. Not only Haggai, but everyone who looked on her, she obtained favor. Somehow everybody was, wow, this girl looks gorgeous. So Esther, verse 16, was taken unto King Ahasuerus into his house royal in the 10th month. He, so if they spent 12 months in preparation, Esther had to wait another 10 months before her turn came in. That means that if we calculate 10 months, and the months were of 30 days back then, right? 10 months of 30 days, that's 300 women that went before her. If the king would bring one woman per night, only one woman per night, which I doubt it. So the amount of women that were there were a lot of women. I mean, hundreds of women. And this was the month of Tebeth in the 7th year of his reign. This is a powerful message. In reality, we won't get into that. Why the month of Tebeth, and why the 10th month, and why the 7th year? There's a whole new, deeper thing about that. We won't get into that. If you want more details about it, then write to me, put the comments, and I'll give you information for those who are watching online. Verse 17. And the king loved Esther. Notice that verb. He loved Esther. Yeah. He loved her, right? Above all the women. And she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that they set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And here the writer wants us to understand something important about coming to power or into power. It's not enough that someone who has the power to invest you with power loves you. If you are not gracious, if you do not obtain grace, if you do not obtain favor, it won't be enough for people to love you. You need to have the three things, the three elements: love, grace, and favor. And we can go on and on and on about each one of them, but we won't get into that today. Maybe next week we'll speak a little bit more about that. So she was made queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast unto all his princes and his servants, even Esther's feast, and he made a release to the provinces and gave gifts according to the bounty. And we already spoke about this concept of bounty, according to the generosity of the king. So he called for a party, it's a wedding party, and instead of him receiving gifts from this wedding, he's giving gifts to people, which is the exact opposite of what happens in weddings today. Why is he giving gifts to people? Because he already received the best gift. The best gift was a wife in a moment of loneliness, in a moments of despair. He had to spend almost 2 years before he could find a wife in loneliness. And being with a woman that you don't love, that could be the worst thing that can happen to a man. But he found the woman that he really loved. He fell in love with this girl. She was not only beautiful, but she was quite unique. She has some qualities that will be developed as the story uh, develops, but we already know something about her. And number one, she was able to keep secrets because it told us the writer told us that her uncle told her not to disclose her ethnicity. So she's able to keep secrets. She's able to be loyal by keeping that secret. So those are characteristics that are embedded in the story, in the narrative. In addition, it says right here when all the women were looking for things to impress the king, she chose nothing. She let the guy who knew to choose for her, which means she's not um she doesn't have she's allowing others. She's listening to others. She was a person who was able to listen to others. She was not hard-headed and hard-headed. She was not someone who was full of herself. She's able to listen to others. So just by reading these things about Esther, we are able to weave in between a little bit of her personality, which is one of the greatest things about the Bible stories, because you can get into the psychology of the people who are involved in the stories. Verse 19, and when the virgins were gathered together the second time, and Mordecai sat in the king's gate, Esther had not yet made known her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther did the commandment of Mordecai like as when she was brought up with him. That means she is faithful to whatever promises she makes. And that is a very strong quality to have in a place like palace, because in a place of power, discretion is imperative. If you are a powerful person and if you have a powerful seat, a powerful office, but you are not discreet, is going to create more trouble for you, because you have not learned how to keep your mouth shut. And Esther here, she knows how to keep her mouth shut.
Yeah, but was there any chance that they might have been afraid that she might have been killed if she told she was a Jew?
Yes. Why? Because the Jews had always been considered unique, special, that they are on their own, they don't mingle with everybody. They have their own God, they have their own customs and all of that, as we will see in the description that Haman will present to the king later on in one of the chapters. Um, verse 22, and the king became known to Mordecai, who told it unto, and the thing, excuse me, no, verse 21, I jumped one verse. In those days, now the writer changes the scenery or the scene, and he wants us to know something about this uncle. In those days, right after the celebration of the wedding, right after all this, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh. Chamberlains were people that had access to the kings. They were able to, they were confidants of the king, and they were like messengers who would go and do dirty work for the king, uh, deliver messages to others, threats to others in the name of the king, without the king having to move anywhere. So these guys knew a lot of secrets about the king. So Bigtan and Teresh, they were keepers. They kept the door of the king. They were wroth and sought to lay hands on the king Ahasuerus. The text doesn't tell us why they were angry against the king. They they were probably paid a lot of money by someone who had their claws on them. My take is that that person was Haman, but there's nothing in the text that indicates that except a small little thing later on that we will talk about it when we get there. Verse 22, and the thing became known to Mordecai, who told it unto Esther the queen, and Esther told the king thereof in Mordecai's name. And that tells us another characteristic of her, another psychological insight into her character. She doesn't take glory that belongs to others for herself. She's respectful of other people's triumphs, but it's also a way of protecting herself. That if Mordecai is giving false information, she's protecting herself, and at least she could survive if something goes wrong. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So verse 23, and when inquisition was made of the matter, and it was found to be so, so it happened to be, the whole thing was true, they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. What was written? It was written in Mordecai's name. It means that the book of the Chronicles that register all the actions that happen in palace, good and bad, in, against or on behalf of the king, were always written, and they were chronicled. And obviously when they wrote it, they said Mordecai found out about this plot by Esther, reported it, and they were very accurate in writing these reports. And this was written in the book of the king. And with this information ends chapter 2, and then a fantastic saga begins to unravel in chapter 3. If you want to know the end of the saga, then come back next week.
Oh, a question.
Yes.
The 10 months that they had to wait or
Mm-hmm.
whatever,
Mm-hmm.
wasn't that 10 months because they wanted to make sure that nobody was pregnant, in taking the position they were going to take?
That would not matter.
Well, if she was pregnant by somebody else, you know what I mean? If
Oh,
it
they
wasn't
they they spent 2 years in this
okay,
palace, and they were attended by eunuchs. The
okay,
eunuchs, by definition, are castrated. They cannot perform,
yeah,
or they could not perform. So um, it would cost their lives for them to be in
right,
palace trying to marry the king, and then found that they are cheating on the king. They would not take that risk, I don't
yeah,
think. They
okay,
were not forced to go there. They came on of their own volition. You see,
okay,
it's different than other places, like in some movies, that the guys force the women to get in there. Um, but this is not the case with Ahasuerus. We gives us also an insight into his psychological mindset. This is not a guy that imposes himself on people. That's why we saw that in chapter 1 when he gave a decree not to force people to drink. So if you don't want to drink, don't force them to drink. That tells you he was a strong believer in freedom of choice. You choosing for yourself what you want to do with your
yeah,
own life. Any other question? Very good question. Very good observation.
Do we
Any
know how old the king was at that time?
how old?
Was the king
Uh,
probably?
the king was a young guy.
Yeah.
He was in his mid-20s. He's not an old guy at all. He's a very young guy. So, but we can see he's impulsive, as we can see in the psychological. So what I will do perhaps sometime, maybe as we develop this, I will create some sort of PowerPoint presentation to highlight some ideas about the psychological aspects of the people involved, because when we look into how their characters are and we analyze based on what the text says, is it just enriches the whole story, because we start identifying ourselves or identifying things that we see in our own characters that need some sort of correction, some sort of what in Hebrew is called tikkun, correction, or some sort of rebuking, or some sort of us, saying, "Wow, look, I do the same thing. I've been like that," etc. And that's why stories are very powerful, because the stories allow us to identify ourselves with the characters in the plot. And that's why Hollywood exploits that, and that's why people are able to sit down 1 hour and 1.5 hours, 2 hours, and it entertains everybody, from the oldest one, grandpa and grandma, to the youngest one, 3 4 years old, grandson, granddaughter, because there is something in the way that all the stories are interwoven, all the details of the story, that appeal to every nature, every person, regardless of the age. And I think this is one of the best stories in the entire Bible. Any other question? All right. If there is no other question, who would like to pray?
I can pray.
Please.
Lord, we thank you for the Bible's lessons this evening. May you bless Pastor Luna and all the work that he does. May you be with all the members of our church, and may you keep um, our faith very strong. Thank you, Lord. Amen.
Amen. And remember, those who are watching, that this program comes to you thanks to the generosity of friends and members of Disciples of the Word Ministries, located at 63 Arlington Street in Nashua, New Hampshire. We are a non-denominational Sabbath-keeping group of believers. Feel free to join us anytime, Saturdays at 10:30 a.m. Bye-bye. See
Bye bye.
you next Saturday in church.